we had a really, really quiet hurricane season. There basically hadn't been any at all so far through September. And this one came up in a sudden. And Buck, you talked about the impact that basically Cuba shut down the areas that this Ian went through. And I believe earlier in the week I said this is what happens when they get into the Gulf, because the waters tend to be very warm this time of year. I've spent, like I said, a lot of time down on the Florida Gulf Coast, and the overall warmth of the waters leads them to be able to strengthen. And by the time this officially eye wall hits, we may be up to a Category 5 or then a couple of miles of that, miles an hour on the wind speed of that potentially happening.
Our thoughts are immediately with all of our people, all people, but certainly all those listening right now in the state of Florida, and what they're facing. We've only had 2 Category 5s hit the U.S. in 30 years. This is going to be a major storm. It is going to be a real test for the response of the DeSantis administration. I think he's going to rise to it. I think he's preparing as best as he can. And there was finally a Joe Biden phone call. Well, that's good. It should have been yesterday, but at least it happened.
Yeah, look, I was, first of all, we have so many people who are listening to us on in the areas that are going to be affected in Florida. And just it is going to be devastating based on what appears to be the wind speed. And Buck, you mentioned only a couple of Category 5s have come across. This in October of 2018, I spent a lot of time down on the Florida Panhandle, and Hurricane Michael came on and absolutely leveled the Panhandle. And I drove through. I helped to raise some money because that's just down the street from where I spend a lot of time. That was a Category 5, and it was absolutely debilitating. What it did to that area of the Panhandle right around Mexico Beach, Florida, for people who are familiar with that area at all, not far down from Panama City Beach, if you're trying to think about the geography there. And I went through and saw it, and Buck, it was like a nuclear bomb had gone off. There was not a standing house anywhere in in Mexico Beach. And what was so tough about that area, and there's all different areas that can get hit, was the storm surge was so high, but that's a flat level of the Florida Gulf Coast. Some places you have at least, like where we are in Rosemary Beach, we've got at least a little bit of elevation. So if there's a storm surge, there isn't immediate hitting of all of the homes. Down there was different. And I know it is just going to be devastating to so many of these people all over the west coast of Florida down there.
The only truly severe weather that I can remember going through was Hurricane Sandy, obviously here in New York City. And I went up to the rooftop of a building in the Gramercy area of New York City. And I'm sorry, actually the Nomad area of New York City. North of Madison Square Park, and went to the roof, and I could see, because this was when already things had started, you could see there was a whole section of Manhattan in darkness. There were some parts that maintained power, but there were whole neighborhoods, areas, hundreds of thousands of people that you could see in total darkness. And I still remember the next day, and Sandy, some areas, I mean, it was horrific because we were not prepared at all. The good thing you can say when you're dealing with any severe weather event for Florida is Floridians are prepared for this as best as one can be. They know that this is a reality of life in that state. And so the building codes, the emergency first responder setup. I mean, Ron DeSantis went into some details about that today. I mean, they are preparing a full-scale airlift for this with Chinook helicopters that are on standby. I mean, when I was hearing DeSantis this morning talk about what they are lining up for this, they are prepared for this to be the big one, a storm that people remember, unfortunately, for decades to come because of its destructive ferocity. Certainly hope it, you could see maybe something the winds could start to recede a little bit faster than people would anticipate, and that would be really helpful. But right now, this is going to be a real challenge. It's a real threat to the people in Florida. And I mean, did you see in Tampa Bay? It's dry. It's unbelievable just as a geological weather-based reality to see photos of Tampa Bay without water, because before a major hurricane like this, the water recedes and then it comes rushing back.
Yeah. So I lived in the Caribbean, you remember, Buck, and they will tell stories about some of the storms that are so terrifying that when you see that water come out, you know it's coming back, right? It's not gonna stay gone for long. And I lived in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and we had some severe storm. They've had severe storms since I left that have basically wiped out the islands. But, Buck, you're no more than like a mile and a half, no matter where you are in, say, St. Thomas from the coastline. And when you see the wind and the waves and the water moving like that, it is awe-inspiring and, frankly, terrifying to see a hurricane come through like this.
As I've been in some places where you've seen extreme situations abroad, and one thing that always comes to mind is I'd feel better if I were on U.S. soil. So I will say the good news, as much as we can find silver linings here for Floridians, is they are prepared. They've got a great governor. They've got a whole apparatus in place to deal with this as much as possible. On a small Caribbean island, as well as anybody. Cuba apparently right now is in total darkness. Cuba has basically no electricity to speak of, and maybe some generators here and there in government facilities, but overall the whole island has had its power knocked out, and we have no idea what the devastation is really like there yet.
It can take a year on these small Caribbean islands for things to get back to some semblance of normalcy. I mean, it is terrifying. So yes, I hope we're going to be able to take care of everybody.
What kind of preparations did you make, Clay? I'm just curious, because the people in Florida right now who are listening, obviously we have affiliates in Tampa, Orlando, Fort Myers, Miami. I mean, all Jacksonville, the Panhandle, all across the state. What are some of the preparations and the things that you remember doing?
Yeah, well, first of all, you board up and you put on your hurricane shutters and everything else. But unlike, say, in Florida, where they say, hey, if you're within a mile of the coastline, you need to, evacuate. You can't really evacuate an island like that. There just isn't the ability to get that many people off the island. So you put on all the storm shutters. You try to get as much water as you can. You batten down the proverbial hatches, and then you really just have to hunker down. I mean, it's kind of terrifying. On a small Caribbean island, because you can't really get away. I mean, some people get fortunate and they get on some of the last flights out, but there's not really anything you can do,
right.
Which is why
and if you're in a structure that you can't really, the problem when it seems to me, and we'll talk to Joe Bastardi in the second hour about this, and he is a extreme weather hurricane expert, so we'll have questions for him when we talk to him about this. But I do know that the two, the most damaging components of this are obviously the water surge, which for people along the coast is going to be a major problem, and just those winds. And if the winds get high enough, you may actually have not just some structural damage; you could have structural demolition.
Yes,
and that's the part of it that I think is particularly scary if you're not on U.S. soil without building codes, but at a certain level of hurricane, you have to wonder where, what the I would be worried no matter what building I was in.
Cat 5s hit, Buck, and I'll give you an example. I mean, when I went through all of that area after Michael, you drive through, there's virtually no homes that are still standing when you get hit with the combo of the surge and the winds, even if they're fabulously built. There's almost none of them that are able to withstand the combo of both of those.
I mean, you're talking about 150. What are the winds? Wind speed of a tornado, for example. You start looking at it. I mean, wind speeds for a tornado, an F3 is 158 to 200 miles an hour. Well, if we're looking at 150 mile an hour winds, that's not just the funnel of the tornado. That's what's coming through here right now.
Yeah. Plus, again, the storm surge, which is that combo between the two, devastating. So, and the other thing to keep in mind, Buck, is that Florida has been hit by these big hurricanes before, but at the time, the state was not that populated, right? So we're talking about the area where they are hitting now. Just in the last 20 years, you can well imagine, you've spent a lot of time, your brothers are down there, in that whole Naples, Fort Myers area, how much has been built just in the last 20 years.
I've got family who live in Florida now.
50 or 60 years, yeah. So, I mean, it's changed a lot.
Just one thing, we'll say to you as we are discussing other news stories too, we'll update what's going on. It has just made landfall. Hurricane Ian has made landfall. And for anyone out there, for whatever you're willing to take from advice when it comes to what we can tell you about this, err on the side of caution here.
Yes.
For anyone who's thinking, should I get out? Should I get to high ground? Should I go to somewhere safer? Yes, please do that.
100%. And trust that you've got a phenomenal governor. This is, again, why your governor matters so much. If this is going to be as devastating as we expect that it will be, DeSantis will do as good of a job as any governor in the country. I feel confident in that.
Hurricane Ian is located roughly 80 miles south-southwest of Charlotte County, and it's moving north-northeast at 10 miles per hour. It is now a Category 4 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of up to 155 miles per hour. That is knocking on the door of a Category 5 storm. We expect landfall in southwest Florida later today as a major hurricane, and will slowly move across the central Florida peninsula before exiting the northeast Florida coast, probably sometime on Thursday. Much of southern Florida is already experiencing impacts from the storm as it moves closer to landfall. There have been several tornado warnings issued during the overnight hours, and we expect to see that continue today. A storm of this magnitude will produce catastrophic flooding and life-threatening storm surge on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and the highest risk areas are ranging from Collier County up to Sarasota County. The current track has the storm making landfall in Charlotte County. If you are in any of those counties, it's no longer possible to safely evacuate. It's time to hunker down and prepare for this storm. This is a powerful storm that should be treated like you would treat if a tornado was approaching.
That's Governor Ron DeSantis there, who is doing everything that he can to prepare his state of Florida for what will be one of the, in terms of winds, 5 most powerful storms to hit the U.S. mainland in the last 100 years. The numbers here, we had on Labor Day weekend of 1935, there was a storm with 185-mile-an-hour winds.
Oh,
and then which I can't even imagine.
That's hard to conceptualize. Yeah.
In 1969, Hurricane Camille. I guess in 1935 they had not yet started naming hurricanes. In 1969, Hurricane Camille was 175 miles an hour. Hurricane Andrew, which people remember, unfortunately, because of the horrific devastation in Florida, 1992, that was at 165 miles an hour. And Hurricane Michael in 2018, which you mentioned, hit the Panhandle area, 160 miles an hour. So it is rare. We did have a recent one in 2018, but it is a very rare thing to have a storm with winds of this speed. You heard Governor DeSantis there say, treat this effectively like a massive tornado, because it is tornado force winds around a giant hurricane-sized funnel, and then the storm surge on top of it, Clay. So it has made landfall. Right now, we talked to Fort Myers affiliate member yesterday on the show about what they're facing. So hopefully people are in safe positions, and they're going to, as Governor DeSantis said, you're going to be riding out the storm where you are at this point for the next 48 hours.
Yeah, and we'll do our best on this show, because I think Thursday and Friday, the fallout will be substantial. And we know that many of you in Florida listen to us, and the radio may be one of the best ways that you're able to get information, frankly, all over Florida, because power is going to be out so many different places. Hopefully your
Wi-Fi is going to be down.
Wi-Fi is going to be down. And so hopefully our stations are able to continue to broadcast all over the state of Florida. but we will do our best on Thursday and Friday as the fallout from these storms continues to be revealed and the storm has passed on. And Buck, as you well know, this thing's not just hitting in the areas of Florida. It's going to then go all the way up throughout much of Florida and into Georgia and South Carolina, and then potentially spiral off into the Atlantic. So there are going to be a lot of communities over the next 3, 4, 5 days that are going to be impacted in a significant way by this storm.
We mentioned the preparations that the governor is making for his state. There was a phone call with Joe Biden, the president, earlier today. We did criticize that it didn't happen yesterday. I think that was fair. I think obviously getting an advanced ability to talk about this or to coordinate rather with the White House would have been meaningful. But there was a phone call today. Here is the governor, though, just laying out to give people a sense of what the preparations entailed here. This is a major, it is like a military scale humanitarian and emergency operation that they are preparing in the state of Florida.
We have 5,000 Florida Guardsmen activated, 2,000 from neighboring states. We have air assets, urban search and rescue teams stationed now in Miami that will be able to respond over to Southwest Florida. Florida Fish and Wildlife, both vehicle assets, water assets, and air assets. And the U.S. Coast Guard is now staged 4 cutters. They also have shallow draft vessels ready to provide search and rescue assistance to the flooded areas. There are over 30,000 linemen staged and ready for power restoration efforts across the state of Florida, and that includes linemen across all of our major utilities, and a lot of these linemen are coming from out of state. So this is a major, major effort.
I mean, it's all hands on deck for
Yes.
all emergency personnel, skilled technicians, electricians, search and rescue, you name it. They are all lined up here because this is going to be, unfortunately, a big one.
Yeah, and again, we will do our best on Thursday and Friday to help out the people all throughout affected regions of Florida. And it is just, we had a really, really quiet hurricane season. There basically hadn't been any at all so far through September. And this one came up in a sudden. And Buck, you talked about the impact that basically Cuba shut down the areas that this Ian went through. And I believe earlier in the week I said this is what happens when they get into the Gulf, because the waters tend to be very warm this time of year. I've spent, like I said, a lot of time down on the Florida Gulf Coast, and the overall warmth of the waters leads them to be able to strengthen. And by the time this officially eyewall hits, we may be up to a Category 5 or within a couple of miles of that miles an hour on the wind speed of that potentially happening.
Governor DeSantis is certainly being tested right now. There are going to be people that no matter what is done by the state of Florida, the authorities of Florida, they're going to be critical of it. Here's just an example of some of the stuff that, he just has no time. This is not a time for any cheap political points to try to be scored when it comes to climate change or when it comes to anything. This is all hands on deck. And so I think it's highly appropriate for the governor of Florida to say when someone's already criticizing the response before anything's even happened yet, that it's nonsense.
FEMA Administrator Chris Wells said today that she acknowledged concerns that Florida, as was said, lacks response to the storm so far, and that
Whoa. Give me a break. That is nonsense. Stop politicizing, okay? Stop it. We declared a state of emergency when this thing wasn't even formed. We've had people in here. You've had counties doing, they've done a lot of hard work. And honestly, you're trying to attack me, I get, but you're attacking these other people who've worked very hard. And so that's just totally false. I don't think we've ever, certainly since I've been governor, declared a state of emergency this early. We made sure that we were very inclusive with it. We said that there was a lot of uncertainty, and we've worked to make sure the preparations that have been done and all the stuff, you talk to the people at the counties when they've needed something, stuff gets there very quickly because of what Kevin and his team have done.
There are a lot of people right now, thousands and thousands of them, who are ready to deploy as soon as it is safe, whether by air or by boat, to areas that are going to be very affected in the state of Florida. And one thing it is important to get on the record now for everyone to know, because I'm sure there will likely be people who try, just like that reporter there. Oh, well, someone who worked at FEMA said there's been preparation underway for days. There's been coordination between state and federal authorities in Florida, and they're doing, it seems at this stage, everything that could reasonably be done, and well in advance of when the actual hurricane is making landfall, which is right now. So keep that in mind.
Yesterday, I spoke with Governor DeSantis for some time. My team has been in constant contact with him from the very beginning. And the mayors of Tampa, St. Pete, and Clearwater. And my message has been absolutely clear, is that we are on alert and in action. We've approved every request Florida has made for temporary assistance, emergency assistance, long-term assistance that I've received. We discussed what we've done to prepare for the hurricane. That includes dispatching hundreds of FEMA personnel and activating thousands of National Guard members. I've also developed a search and rescue team and deployed them to multiple federal agencies, and they're already on the ground and ready to help as we speak.
So President Biden has had a conversation with Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, and that is all in trying to coordinate here and in preparation for a storm that could be the worst hurricane to hit this country in many years, perhaps many decades. Right now, the latest updates here as we're watching this, you have over 600,000 are without power in Florida. You do have a lot of news coverage going on right now that is showing really hard to believe until you see it yourself. The storm surge that's already gathering, the winds. It looks as though you have tornado force winds alongside a tsunami of storm surge. So you have a massive wall of water that is going to be flooding along the coasts, and winds stretching out for many, many miles that are going 150 miles an hour. And this is rare for there to be a storm that is at this Category 4, really 4+ level. It's just shy of being a Category 5 hurricane. And part of the challenge here for everybody who is hunkering down, and just for the state of Florida, and perhaps Georgia and the Carolinas too, if they get hit substantially, it's going to be the duration of this storm over these areas. It's a massive, powerful, and slow-moving storm. So a major, major challenge going on right now. Our thoughts and prayers go out to everybody in Florida right now. I know a lot of you are listening, and some of you may really only be able to listen on radio because of power going out, which is going to affect Wi-Fi. And if you have battery-powered radio, obviously you'll be able to get signals. We're going to try to stay as up to date here as we can on what is going on. But this is a big one. This is as big as it gets, really. So we are hopeful that the first responders, the teams that are down there, they're going to do a lot of critical and very brave work, that they're able to just keep the absolute highest safety possible for everybody down there. To minimize any loss of life is goal number one, and then to get everybody in Florida back on their feet and get that state up and running again. So we're going to keep a very close eye on all of this.